Welcome to Microdose the Mind, where tiny doses create monumental shifts. We're your hosts, Brian Schwartz and Jeremy Wolf, and we're here to guide you through the fascinating world of microdosing, both in plant medicine and daily habits. Get ready to expand your mind and reshape your reality.
So many people out there suffer needlessly, endlessly, toiling. Triggers come up, stresses, all sorts of things come up in life and hit us, and we get consumed by our thoughts and we just get stuck in it. And I know from experience, I was in that for much of my life. What I'm coming to learn more and more each day that I live is I'm learning how to use discomfort as a tool for growth. Because let's be honest, right? Positive feedback, all the wins, all that stuff, that's the easy shit. It's the real ugly stuff, right? The dark emotions. From my experience, that's the space where real transformation lives. And I've employed some tools throughout my journey that have been very, very helpful. The thing that I've been missing, though, for so long was community and really sharing what I've learned with others and getting with people that are farther along in their journey, where we can kind of leverage what we know and just really touch more people. So our guest today, Matt Sowell, joins us from Cold Club, and he has really aligned his business and his life with trying to help people leverage stress to their advantage. And I've spoken with him before at length, and he is a wealth of knowledge. He's doing really good work in this world. And I really believe that you'll get some good, useful information out of this episode. So without further ado, Matt, thanks for joining us, brother. Excited to get into this.
Right on, Jeremy. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about these topics. These are certainly relevant in today's world.
More so than ever, my brother, more so than ever. So before we get into what it is that you do with the business on a day-to-day, I think it's more interesting to take a look back and look at your origin story, because so many times where we end up landing in our professional space and in our life is shaped by our experiences through life. So I want to go back. Tell me what led you to this point, right? How did you first get involved with the work you do? And then we'll dig more into the philosophy and how you actually practice it on a day-to-day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I can look at it compositionally as like all of these stepstones along the whole path, where the initial part was really just the confrontation with domestic violence as a youth. And that set down a lot of insecurity and anxiety, right? So having your home, your stable place, super disrupted on a daily basis, it does that to a lot of people. And certainly it did it for me. And so I started to grapple with this and try to figure out like what's going to actually release some of this. And I dove into sports. That was the first sort of headway. The physical outlet was fantastic, but it didn't resolve that underlying deep insecurity. And so I turned to all kinds of things, real simple breathing exercises, like count to 10 type breathing exercises, 10 breaths. I tried to fake meditation because I was a young kid. I didn't really know what I was doing. The internet wasn't a thing at that time. And so it was a process of evolution. But when I actually discovered certain types of martial art, specifically ones with high intensity partner engagements and having to remain calm under pressure, it unlocked a whole possibility for me in terms of resolution in how I felt anxiously, insecure, all of those kind of things that just resolved it. And that was the first step in leading me down to understand stress on a deeper level. Now, fast forward through martial arts, training others, helping with survival self-defense practices, and seeing that resolution happen in a variety of different people, I started to get a lot of encouragement. And I dove full in on that side. I bought a martial arts school in 2010. And from there, I started to compete in different aspects, mostly Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Ended up getting an injury, right? And so that injury
it happens. Yeah,
I wasn't healing. And I was desperate to find anything that could resolve a lot of the issues. I was working 15-hour days. I was pushing myself super hard, supporting a family of 4. And as a martial arts school owner, that could be a challenge. But that unlocked another sort of understanding when I was introduced to cold water. And that was through the Wim Hof Method. I was part of the first group of Wim Hof Method instructors. And what Wim really showed me early on was that the power of breath could actually be leveraged to induce a stress response positively. And that flipped everything I had learned to that point on its head. Through my martial arts journey in my 20s, I was exposed to Qigong practices and a number of other things, Tai Chi, that deeply integrated that slow, deliberate movement, mindset, focus, and the more challenging martial arts, as I said, helped develop calmness under pressure. But then there was this whole other dimension. And so that launched me to the next thing and the next and the next. And slowly what I discovered is there are effectively very specific adaptive stress circuits, things that are trainable, that allow us to adapt to any stress that we don't choose. And that's been the biggest insight I've had over the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years. And I've really pushed all the way in that. And that's what Cold Club is really born out of, the 5 key pathways that allow us to train specific circuits within the body so that all the stuff that you had mentioned, the dark emotional stuff, the things that come up on a daily basis, well, now we can manage that without a lot of effort.
Yeah, man, I love it. And so much of what you said resonated with me. And I think we spoke about this briefly when we had our conversation a month or so back. We were talking about Wim Hof and how I got ultimately introduced to the breath and the ice. I was in a really dark place in my life. And I actually met with you, Brian, and we did the DMT experience. And I had like a harrowing experience. And I didn't know what to make out of it. And I was like confused. I remember telling you, Brian, that this was something I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy. It was such a horrible experience. And from that, I started researching what actually happened to me. And in that research, I came across Wim Hof talking about unlocking your body's own natural DMT. And then I got into the breath work and I got into the cold plunge. This is like six years ago now. And I've been employing these practices daily ever since. And it's been incredible tool that I've used for growth. You remember that, Brian?
I do remember that, Jeremy.
Way back when?
Way back when.
Yeah, man.
And you've encouraged me to dive into the breath work and the ice work as well.
Yeah, and there's so many different. So, Matt, I want to ask, like, obviously, with the background in Wim Hof, there's so many different modalities, different avenues for breath work. The one that I've landed with and I've really been exploring, obviously, is Wim Hof. I know, Brian, you talked about doing some other practices. What do you typically like? Where do you land with how you work with people? Do you use a variety of different practices? Is there any one in particular that resonates with you and the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic question. And I mean, just to speak to your point with regard to a DMT experience and how, disruptive it was, hopefully downstream, downstream, hopefully that ends up being a very positive experience in hindsight as you move through this. But breathwork can mimic a lot of those deeper intensity exogenous experiences, right? So if we take something from the outside, they're going to take us for a ride. Hardcore. When we induce those type of experiences that are similar through the breath, well, we can direct the experience much differently. And so for my take, like Wim Hof is one dimension that allows you to sort of exist in a more sympathetic or action-oriented state that can help unlock, as you mentioned, DMT and allow us to experience, a moderate form of what you did when you took that substance from the outside. That's pretty powerful. And it's certainly not the only one. For my take, I've got 27 protocols that we use through Cold Club because the outcome will drive what we need to do underneath. And not everything works for everyone. For example, sometimes I call it high-metabolic breath work. That's a Wim Hof method. Kundalini has similar exercises that can be very sympathetic driven, right? Where we're just elevating the system. And that can be very positive for some people, even to reduce anxiety or allow us to find peace at the end. It's like a rebound effect. But for others, it's going to drive people mad. It's going to steer a more sympathetic dominant and create adrenaline states that are persistent and last to disrupt sleep, to eventually drive sickness, and people not be very healthy in the long term. And so moderating those tools or having them be appropriate for individuals over a arc of a practice, I think is quite important. It can be a very powerful and beautiful one, but it's one. And so the others that I tend to focus on may be for sports related performance, or for those that may need to just come off of the edge and really work on everything that can down escalate their nervous system. And so we'll work through protocols that are solely nose oriented and extended exhales. Like if we can think just in the most basic terms, every breath in is a very action oriented response, and every breath out is a more resting response. And then we can steer that based on the emphasis, the speed, the depth, all of these other categories that can impact how our physiology will change as we go through it. I'll give you a quick example. I was talking to this lady, she's a doctor, and she runs a podcast specifically addressed towards singers. And that's where she started, and then kind of branched out more broadly from there. But for her sake, she was really struggling with people telling her to do a 4-7 combination, which is very common. 4 seconds in, 7 seconds out. So that takes advantage of a shorter action response and a longer sort of de-escalation response in terms of the nervous system. And she said, I could do that forever and it wouldn't make a damn bit of difference. Why? Because some of us are operating at sort of a baseline that's slightly elevated, not all the way, but slightly elevated. And we need to basically create a system of entrainment. We need to match the system where it's at, bump it up, and take it back down a little bit. And so a faster style of breath work was more helpful for her. And so we needed to adopt a protocol that was primarily nose only, right? Because as you include the mouth, that's very sympathetic driven, and it can take you too far sometimes. And so we did a nose only, bumped her up a little bit faster, and that was able to relegate her back down to baseline and actually get peace, right? So everybody's a little bit different. And of course, as we practice, things change, right? And so my goal is to determine what does the individual need, and then what does the evolution of their practice look like over the long arc. That's really what I focus on.
I love that. Yeah. And I never really thought about that before. I just assumed that if you employ any breath work practice, it will be good, but that's so important. Everybody has different physiology, and having a custom plan and working with somebody to do this is very, very good stuff. One thing you mentioned, and I want to loop Brian into this, I think this is interesting. We were talking about like the external things we do to us to induce stress versus the internal things that we can do. And there's different, I'm thinking more along the lines of like with breath work, that's actual work you have to do. I think it's so useful because you have the option to stop at any time. But on the other end of the spectrum, a lot of the work that Brian does in the shamanic space, there are a lot of plant medicines and modalities that are actually employed in the body that create tremendous amounts of stress. And that's also very useful. And I found that they're both useful in their own ways, but I like the ones better, I think, where you can kind of pull the plug if you want, because it helps you train that muscle, like the breath work and the ice. But I want to hear it from your lens, Brian. Why do you think, I guess, like, what's actually happening from your perspective when someone stays present through discomfort instead of escaping it?
Sure. Thank you, Jeremy. And Matt, thank you very much for sharing. I have a deep respect for those of us on this path. I do realize that a lot of us come from pain, and pain for us is typically the greatest motivation for growth. And I also know that discomfort for me is the price of freedom. So I actively try and put myself in situations that are uncomfortable for the purpose of growing. And when I'm remaining too comfortable for too long, I know I'm on the wrong path. So thank you very much for having me here. We appreciate you. It's interesting you said something in regarding Kundalini breath work and the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic breath work. And in my experience, both practices are equally as viable and important. In my own journey, example, Jeremy, with my first ayahuasca experience, right? I had this unintentional, intense Kundalini awakening where I felt this energy just run from my feet, from the earth, through my forehead, explode into, a psychedelic wonderland. But no one told me what happens afterwards, right? And afterwards,
dark night of the soul, baby.
the dark night of the soul. I was very disoriented. I didn't quite have a grasp on who I was as a person. There was lots of fragments of myself that were coming up, and I looked for help, and I dove into breath work. And the first thing that my coach told me was, do not do Kundalini breathing. You know, he was very adamant about the parasympathetic breath work, and I've learned through trial and error. But for me, a lot of the inhale through the mouth breath work, it disorients me. You know, so I know, you know, these medicines can do the same thing, except like Jeremy was saying, like you were saying, with the breath you can control it, right? And with these other plant medicines, you can't control it. You know, so I always err people with a side of caution when entering into this world to make sure they are prepared for what's possible. And part of that preparation is breath. Right. And I'm curious to hear from you, Matt. What would you recommend to someone embarking on the shamanic path, working with some of these very powerful plant medicines, including myself, as in terms of like what would be a good way to prepare for these experiences, you know, and what would be a good way to integrate afterwards, mainly focusing on the parasympathetic nervous system?
Yeah, so it's such a beautiful thing, Brian. Thank you. And I appreciate the path you're on as well, man. It's so needed, and quality guides are rare in this world. And so to have somebody, it sounds like you're deep within this world, grateful for you, man.
Thank you, brother.
So to me, I like to look at the situation and the environment to help us show up where we need to. So what do I mean by that? If I am I'll use an ice bath analogy. An ice bath is very much an external stressor. I'm not going to change the temperature of the water. The only thing I can do is adapt myself. And the faster that I'll be able to adapt will be determined by how I handle it mentally and emotionally. And how that's driven is through the breath. So if I get into the water, the initial thing that's going to happen is my breath is going to want to jump and speed up and get out of control. And my job is to actually facilitate a calmer breath after a short adaptation period. Like, let your breath go a little bit. That's fine for 4 or 5 breaths. But then the regulation needs to happen. And so steering to the nose and extending the exhales in the midst of that cold stress really is what allows our body to adapt and facilitate the most peaceful that we can exist in the deep discomfort of ice. Well, a lot of the shamanic work is not terribly dissimilar. I mean, you mentioned ayahuasca, and this is something that holds close to my heart. I've done many of these type of journeys, and the breath is the anchor within that sphere, right? And so some of the things that were told to me early on by some of the people I deeply respect that introduced me to that work were put your feet flat on the ground, hold them firm, and anchor to your center. And I took, okay, what does that really mean? Not just physically, although that was a suggestion physically, but more of the deeper side of how do I hold the center? And to me, it comes right back to the breath. And so as your body and mind is elevating in that state and it gets more and more intense through that process, being able to recognize that you have that locus of control inside by accessing the nose, right? By facilitating the breath. And maybe it's only nose breathing, right? That's the most parasympathetic that exists. Long, deep, slow the breath down, create what I often will call coherence breathing, right? So that coherence breathing is even breaths in and out. That could be very resonant in terms of how the heart and the breath and the mind all link together. In the midst of that really, really, really intense stressor that's kind of like a wave, right? It's not consistent like an ice bath. An ice bath, it's going to stay. You've got to have that initial acceleration and calmness amidst the stress, but the water temperature is not fluctuating unless you're in moving water or something along those lines, right? But we know that the psychedelic experience shows up very different. It hits you and then it pulls back. It's like a big pulse, and it can be extremely overwhelming at times if you're not prepared. And so what I try to do in preparation or suggest to others in terms of the breath work is, can you learn or develop a practice that doesn't drive you deep into sympathetic and cause extra anxiety, and yet really push the limits of what breath work can provide? Because you can get absolutely psychedelic in breath work. In fact, just as a quick aside, I run a an event that's called VIBE, Vibrational Breathing Experience. And it's a 7-stack protocol that sends people to ethereal places. It's a very intense, beautiful experience, and, huge DMT production in the body. But it's all self-induced. It is the work. It's the breath work that allows you to go to that place. And so having a little bit of early exposure with that, and then learning the flip side. So after an experience like that, can you learn to very calmly work through coherence breathing, that even breaths, in and out, 5 seconds or 6 seconds per inhale and exhale. So you're really reducing the breathing rate and getting very calm. And having that experience prior to can definitely help you in the shamanic world, I believe, where you're going with these intense rides, and yet you can still hold that center and keep your feet on the ground, both physically and metaphorically.
Beautiful.
Thank you, brother. And I know for myself, I've had experiences where, I'm in the medicine and I start to panic and I start to breathe fast. Right.
Or you forget to breathe entirely, right?
Or forget to breathe entirely. But then the experience gets more intense. It gets more intense, and then I have a little voice that's like, slow down and breathe, and you start slowing down your breath and you breathe, and the medicine responds to you and it breathes. And I know that these practices, they work well in the medicine space and they work well out of the medicine space, and also I think for people with PTSD, it's also very important to learn these practices as well. More so, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the coherence breathing, right? The slow parasympathetic breathing to kind of help anchor the body, while we're in this state of unregulation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think there's different levels to it, right? An advanced practitioner that's very advanced in both breathing and their experience with plant medicine can and will do very different things within that scope than somebody maybe new that's introduced that to this thing at the beginning and or has some PTSD from past life, right? That they're still managing and dealing with. And that can even be true just the breath work alone, much less adding psychedelics on top of that. So take, for example, I've worked with a lot of military, law enforcement, even soldiers coming directly out of war. Well, their nervous system is on tilt. It's way high, right?
Jacked up.
Exactly. And if you take that person and you do really intense breath work, it'll spin out of control a lot of times. So instead, you need some moderation there, right? You want to try to meet the nervous system where it's at, but in order to pull it back down. As I mentioned, I talked about that concept of entrainment. This is a very clear concept, I think, used through music. So just to explain to your audience, for those that are unfamiliar with the term, entrainment speaks to two independent systems that, if they interact long enough together, will eventually become one. Okay. And so music is often used in this case. If I am feeling like I've got a lot of energy in my system, maybe I just won a big world title or something and I'm super excited. If I play slow, classical, melodic music, it'll probably be sort of a dissonance. Like it's like a grating on your nervous system. You won't like it. And you'll change the channel to something that you do like. But if you play like something that's got big tones and, we're the champions type of thing, like that resonates with us in that moment. At the same token, if I am feeling like I want to be super peaceful and calm, well, I don't play, Metallica or, some kind of really intense rhythms. I play something soft that meets the heart. And if I want to change my state, well, I can do that step by step by shifting the rhythms, the tones, the speed, all of those kind of pieces. And breath work is a lot like that. And so it's helpful to meet the nervous system, but then where are we going to direct it? And when we experience those same kind of things, as you mentioned, Brian, in terms of like those really intense moments where the breath is starting to speed up, usually that's telling us something. And so to me, it's like, how do we harness that rather than fight it? If my breath is speeding up, first is awareness. Okay, let the breath go. And then understand, all right, well, what I'm going to do from this place, I'm going to keep that breath. And now I'm going to shift the rhythm. I'm going to slow it down just a little bit. And then a little bit more. And a little bit more. And before you know it, I'm calm again in the midst of the stress. And you can direct that journey on such a profound level. by having and building that awareness. And it takes practice. I don't want to presume that this is like overnight.
It all takes work, lots of work, no shortcuts, right?
No
I think,
shortcuts.
yeah, one of the things I've noticed about the psychedelic journeys that people have, and this is something that was sorely missing, and you alluded to it earlier, Brian, it's that people go away and they have these unbelievably profound breakthrough experiences where they get shocked to their core. You know, we both experienced the Kundalini awakening, and then we go back into our daily life, into the old programs, the old grind, things that they just suck us back in. And it is so incredibly toxic to get caught into that. And it could be very, very damaging to people. And the thing that I've missed throughout this process was the integration side. And it took me so long to figure out what was required to integrate all these experiences. And it comes through the deep, dark work that everybody's avoiding. And so I think that that's sorely missing in the space where when people have these ceremonies, that's one of the things I'm working to build is an outlet for that. So when people do have these experiences, they can come out of that and have a framework in place and have a support system and have structure that helps guide them so they don't have to stumble through this process for 6-7 years of their whole life, even before they start seeing real important change.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to say about the ice, and then I want to move on because I know I believe there's 5 pillars to what you do, right, Matt? If I remember correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
All right. So with the ice, this is just another thing I love. Like I call myself the ice wolf. Sometimes I don't do nearly enough of it, but this is how I explain it. Every time, like I'll go to Publix and get ice, and people say, "Oh, you're having a party?" No, I'm doing an ice bath. People are so intrigued by that. And the way I like to explain it to anybody that hasn't done the ice before is this: it's no matter what state of mind you're in. I don't care if you're depressed. I don't care if you're angry. I don't care what negative emotions or whatever is going on inside your head. When you get into a cold plunge and you submerge yourself in the ice, you become completely present in an instant. No matter what's in your mind, that goes away right away. And you're like in fight or flight mode where you're like, oh my God, if I don't get out of here, I'm going to die. And then, like I said, Matt, you go to the breath and you regulate yourself. And then through that process, I mean, you have some unbelievably transcendental meditative states if you sit in the ice long enough. I'm interested to see how would you explain it to somebody that hasn't done it before? The way I started was I started sticking my hands in like little buckets of ice, and then my feet. And I kind of gradually went into it. What's been your experience with how you work with folks individually with the ice? Because I know you do lots of full immersion trips to Alaska and things like that, which I want to get into. But talk a little bit about how you introduce your clients into the ice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it depends on the degree to which people have prior experience, where they live in the world. Are they coming to a one-day workshop? Am I working with them online? Or are they coming to a place like Alaska for the first time? So that'll drive some of the discussion. But as a very basic thing, the gradual nature of just what you described, Jeremy, is perfect. You know, it's like if you do extremities, to be frank, that's a little bit more challenging because the nervous system is built in such a way that if there's an out, it'll take it. So if your mind has an out, it's going to take the out. And when we are at the most extreme with, you know, hands and ice and so forth, sometimes the brain won't shut off. It's like, get out, get out, get out. That same thing happens when we submerge, but that message shuts down a lot quicker, especially if we can get a hold of the breath. And so if we go in at the very beginning, this is all sympathetic driven all the way up to the shoulders, which is why you see a lot of recommendations to submerge all the way to the shoulders, because it helps get that fullness so that your brain will switch to say, okay, don't get out. We have to rise to this occasion.
That makes sense.
Right? Whereas it doesn't say we have to rise to this occasion with the hand. That takes a lot more mind effort to overcome the nervous system's natural reaction, which is get the hell out of here.
It is a lot more painful to just put your hands in.
Way
it's like,
more painful.
Like gnawing pain. Yeah, I noticed that. Interesting.
Yeah, and so that's because, you know, it's at the extremities, and the way that the stress response works is you pull blood away from the extremities in order to gather around the core. Number two is you've got so many nerve endings in your hands and feet, just zillions, so that we can have a lot of this bidirectional feedback from the environment through our hands and feet. It's very important to let us know where we are and what's happening and so forth. So there's a lot of reasons for it. But in any case, like, it can be quite challenging. So whether you're starting that or just going to waist deep at the beginning, because 60% of your thermal receptors and most of your core is going to be very protected, And so, getting into the waist at the beginning is right for some people. The point is gradual. So keep the temperatures a little bit higher. Okay. And work your way down over the course of 2 to 3 weeks. That would be my
Start with
suggestion.
cold showers, maybe. That's a good place to start.
What's that?
Start with cold showers, right? That's a good place to
Cold
ease into it.
showers is an excellent start, and depending on where you live in the world, you guys are down in Florida, you don't really have much in the way of cold showers.
Not that cold, yeah.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time in Mexico City. Cold showers don't really exist. I can put it on as cold as I want and it's still, 70 plus degrees. But the point is like, so long as you feel discomfort, and that's going to be relative to where you live in the world and what your prior exposure or experience is, that's the beginning. Start with that little bit of discomfort and then figure out ways to lower the temperature gradually over the course of, 2 to 4 weeks, I would say, is really the buildup. So it's just like any other habit. Most habits are formed between 14 and 21 days, and they're reinforced up to 30 to 90 and so forth to really make something a daily or a regular habit. Mm-hmm. And so if you take that approach, the body adapts quite quickly. Yep. And I'll say that, but I can take people that are novice, brand new, to a place like Alaska in the dead of winter, where temperatures are extremely cold, where, we're getting into frozen lakes, waterfalls, cutting holes in the ice, 18 inches deep and getting in. And newcomers can do that and adapt quite well, even inside of a 3-day setting. So you'll find that on day one, there's a little bit of trepidation and hesitation, but with some good encouragement, guidance, and the proper techniques, you see people going through that process, doing a little bit of contrast therapy typically. In other words, going into the cold and then using a sauna as well to heat back up and doing some of that. But by day 3, you see wild transformation. You literally see people being able to swim in the coldest of cold and not having that same reluctance. Our physiology, this human wisdom that we carry inside of all of us, is incredible when it's unlocked. Mm-hmm. Most of us just don't know. We've never tapped into it. It's not been a thing. And so under the proper guidance, I can take somebody, like I said, brand new. It doesn't matter what part of the world they're from, even if they've never experienced a cold day in their life. And you can watch them by day 3 being just like the Inuit. It's like, what do you want? How do you want to do it? So really, it's a matter, I would say, of like having the right techniques and guidance within that. And if you're guiding yourself, well, you got to go slow because you don't know what you don't know. So start off nice and easy and build it up gradually.
You mentioned you can't change the temperature of the water that you're in. That's true. But what you can change is you could break the heat barrier that you have from sitting still. So if you move from sitting still on the ice, once you're regulated and then you start swimming, well, all of a sudden now you get the stress again, you get the discomfort and you got to re-regulate yourself, right?
Yeah. And, just for safety's sake, I always recommend if people are in nature or anything like that, always be where you can stand on the ground. Especially if you are any sort of new or intermediate practitioner, and always take a friend because, and I'm not trying to scare anybody, but just to give the proper lay of the landscape, the vast majority of people that end up having a really adverse event or worse death come from, usually they're within, 6 feet or 9 feet of safety, but they literally had diminished capacity and couldn't make it that far. And those are even people that were known to be otherwise good swimmers. The cold changes everything. It is an extremely powerful force that demands respect. So at the beginning, make sure you've got some good safety bounds there. You can stand, you've got good entries and exits. There's no issues there. You're not going to have to crawl out of a difficult space or anything like that. So if you're going to those extreme environments, I definitely suggest that. A way to mimic swimming to break that thermal barrier, as you mentioned though, Jeremy, is just simply move your hands and legs. Just start flapping, moving your body back and forth. That'll break the thermal layer. Yep. Or sit in a nice, quiet part of a river, right? Where it's, protected. So you're not going to have to deal with currents or any of those kind of issues. But you still get that movement. That'll break the thermal layer. So lots of ways to do it.
So Brian, I'm curious, in the shamanic world, is there talk about cold exposure? I haven't heard much of it from what I've experienced. Have you done any research into how that's used potentially in that space?
It's interesting because I have not seen much cold exposure either. I've seen the heat exposure,
Mm-hmm.
You know, the temescals, the sweat lodges are very powerful.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like they're maybe equally as powerful in their own different way.
Sure.
Um, but no, I've not seen much of the cold exposure actually. And as we're talking, I was thinking to myself, how amazing would it be to have Matt come join one of our retreats
Yeah. Right.
and throw in the cold exposure with the work that we do?
So powerful. That's why I
Yeah.
asked about it, because we've
Yeah.
talked about it many times at the, we just don't ever actually implement it, and you just don't hear it. And I think it could be an incredibly useful tool to explore, certainly under the right guidance, right? We don't want to do anything too crazy. So Matt, okay, so we have the breath, we have the ice. Let's go through some of the other pillars here. I know we've talked about nutrition is a big one, right?
The clear pathways that are adaptive, that the stress pathways, the adaptive stress pathways, these are circuits in the body that are very specific. So you mentioned with the cold, for example, that we get into that fight or flight response, and that's not wrong. That's correct. But it's actually a very specific circuit that's different. And let me describe these, and it'll be helpful to do this at the beginning, and then we can walk through each of the others, I think, more clearly. So when we get into the ice, this part of the brain, the hypothalamus, that's like the master governor, starts to send downstream signals for adaptation. And it'll send a signal to the pituitary, and that gland will say, okay, we need a composition of hormones in the body to make sure that we can survive in this extreme thing. And as a result, triggers the kidneys, and it pools blood all around the core and head, and through the legs and arms, it restricts the blood, right? So that it redirects everything around the vital organs of the body. And so a lot of times we'll talk about where the blood flows, the energy goes, right? All the energy is going to here in that stress response. And as a result, there's all these beautiful metabolic processes where tissues like the liver tissue, the muscle tissue, all these, the fat tissue, they're all communicating very clearly to show up for these different adaptations required to keep you alive. It's quite beautiful. Well, on the flip side of that, you guys mentioned heat and the heat ceremonies, right? The heat ceremonies are beautiful. It's a very different process. So we still have a similar circuit. I like to think of these 5 circuits as like a heads and a tails in a lot of cases, like they're 2 sides of the same coin. Well, cold and heat, they run together. I call it thermogenic stress. Well, the heat side of things, it's the opposite. We need to stabilize core body temperature by giving away heat. So much of the blood travels to the surface of the skin rather than to the core. And if you're in too hot of an environment for too long, you start actually starving the organs of oxygen and blood, right? Because so much is going to the surface to try to give away heat as fast as you can. Now, in a more moderate, or if you're used to it and it's a more proper dose, well, then you find the balance and you get all of this beautiful metabolic effect, and you get all of the tens of different benefits that we all hear about on social media daily these days, right? So that's the positive side of things. The next pathway is for the actual fight or flight response. So this is your classic sort of harm. Like if you perceive a threat to yourself and or harm to another, that's a very different stress response. That's the fight or flight response in sort of the classic sense. And similar processes happen, except for that hypothalamus is going to trigger the pituitary and then send downstream signals to direct blood flow to the larger working muscles. So that's going to be your arms and your legs. So quite the opposite of the cold, very different than the heat, right? So we get to vie for competition. This shows up in all kinds of sports, strength, movement, or if you have to fight for your life in the most extreme sense, right? So we've got that piece, and that's a second key pathway that's trainable. Then we've got a third one, which is fasting. So the fasting pathway where all the blood accumulates is very different. It's going to be mostly around the viscera, right? Where you're going to go through digestion and so forth. You're also going to get some in the brain, but less. Most of it is going to be this cleanup work in the organ system. So that's quite beautiful, the fasting.
Matt, you said viscera. What is that?
So all of your, basically just think about all of your guts. Let's just keep it there. Just everything in the guts, the digestive tract and all of that kind of stuff, right? You're going to be producing new stem cells in that area. You're going to be cleaning out inflammation. You're going to go through a process called autophagy, which is killing all of the necrotic or bad cells in order to build new cells. And you get this regeneration that's quite beautiful. And so all of that process happens in the fasting stress response. And there's a little bit different triggers that are associated with these. Not all of them are, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenals, which is a really common part. But some of these include the thyroid, for example. Many people have thyroid dysfunction. They struggle with maintaining metabolism and weight because their thyroid is not healthy. And so to induce that positive stress response, where we start to get this new health. And of course, the other side of that is nutrition. You got to have adequate nutrition. That's sort of the resting side of the coin. Just like with all of the others, though, with the resting side of nutrition, if we're not having proper nutrition and we're causing inflammation because of what we're eating, that could also be problematic. So just kind of keep aware. But typically, that's the resting side of things, is that the feeding side, the nutrition side. And then we've got the next one, which is connection. And you mentioned this, Jeremy. This is so important for... Yeah. You talked earlier about integration, and this is the best place to really talk about integration. Like integration, if we have a really, really profound experience and we don't create the space to integrate that experience, it just becomes a memory. And sometimes that memory is bad, or sometimes that memory is like, that was really harsh, but we don't carry the true message of learning and growth and empowerment going forward without integration. So integration between, having a facilitator, having a community, having a connection, like a guy like Brian or yourself or others in a group that are taking the time after the profound insight has happened to carry you through to make the making meaning brain connect to the deeper side of that spiritual self. It's a critical piece. And using the breath, using discussion, journaling, any of those kind of pieces so that we can connect both deeper to ourselves as well as those around us that may share in that is a critical feature. So connection becomes a really big one. And that's on sort of one side of the coin, that beautiful, calm, engaging connection. And then on the other side of that is the induced stress response that can be positive. If it's with an intimate partner, you're actually facilitating a process where that hypothalamus is triggering the pituitary to trigger the gonads, and all of the blood flow goes to our sexual organs. If I'm doing this with, say, shared battle and war, well, that's going to be that's going to be differently driven by a process called vasopressin. That's a hormone and antidiuretic, but it puts a lot of chemicals in the system that typically are associated with fear and attachment. So you can think about the past relationships where you were really worried about maybe your partner, being as close to you as you wanted. You're worried about what they're doing or anything that they're, why are they out without me? I'm feeling really attached to this person and they're not right next to me and I'm feeling insecure and all of these crazy feelings. That's a vasopressin driven response, right? And that happens a lot. And so vasopressin is there, historically to just help us facilitate a deeper connection with others and with our spouse, with our children, especially as men. That's a big driven one. Whereas the women, they focus more on the oxytocin. They get that bonding hormone because they're, breastfeeding and different things. Now, men, we still have oxytocin just in smaller quantities or under different circumstances. But so that connection piece is the fourth pillar. And then the fifth is the breath. The breath, you can induce a stress response. You can also induce a rest response. And in fact, it is the modulator or the driver, the remote control for all the other stressors of anything you'll encounter in life. Those are the trainable pathways.
I love it. I always say I know a lot about a little and a little about a lot. Well, Matt, you just reaffirmed that for me. So fascinating. And that's what I love. And the more conversations I have with people that are truly experts in what they do, the more humbling it is to me. And I realize that I only know what I know. And it's my goal in this life to be able to help people to the best of my abilities when I interact with them. And if I only know a little bit, I want to have a network of people like you, Matt, like you, Brian, that are truly experts in the work that you do so that I could help as many people as possible. Really, that's the life's work here, I think.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Okay, so Matt, as we wrap up here, we only have a few minutes left. Let everybody know how they could learn more. If anything that you've been saying is resonating with our listeners, what's the best way to reach you? Maybe share your website, Instagram. Let us know how we can connect.
Excellent. Yeah. So my website is coldclub.com. And that's one of the best places to go for social media. On most channels, I am coldclub_Matt Sowell, MATTSOULE. And you can find me on Instagram. On X, I've got a fairly large presence there. It's a little bit different. But you can find the handle right on my website, so I'll direct you there. For those that are interested in exploring any of these kind of modalities, through the heat, through the cold, nutrition, fasting, deeper connection, breath work, Cold Club has got a lot of really cool experiences. In fact, I've got one, Jeremy, coming up February 4th through 8th, where we really dig in deeply to breath work. We go on adventures every day. We do fear work, where we take people into a night plunge, and you get to really understand how to calm your nervous system in the midst of that elevated stress in the most epic and beautiful territory. People come back changed. So that's what I'd recommend.
Yeah, man, I really wish I could join you. Unfortunately, the stars haven't aligned. I found out about it a little bit too late, but mark my words, I will be there on one of your Alaska trips in the near future.
I can't wait to have you out, brother.
Yeah, it's going to be great, man. Brian, any last words before we wrap up here?
Matt, thank you very much. Very fascinating. I learned a lot, and I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate you, brother.
Yep.
Beautiful. All right, we'll leave it at that. We'll, of course, drop a link in the description below to all of Matt's contact information. So if you're listening to this, if anything of what we said is resonating, check it out. Follow him on Instagram, reach out. Really, these practices have had a huge impact, as you can see in my life, if you've been following this content and been watching the arc of my own personal progression. And I'm just excited to continue doing this work and bringing it to more and more people out there and really trying to make a difference. If any of this resonated with you, let us know. What was your biggest takeaway? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your feedback. And we're always interested to hear more. Like, we want to have, the show is called Microdose the Mind. I think a lot of what we talk about mirrors this idea. People hear microdosing, they think of psilocybin, but that's not just what we're talking about, right? We're talking about training yourself through different modalities and being consistent, and small little things that you can implement in your life that lead to huge growth on the other side. And really, that's what it's all about. So everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. Matt, appreciate your time. You are truly a wealth of knowledge, doing great work out there, and keep it up, man. Brian, always a pleasure to see you. Everyone, take care. Have a lovely day, and we'll see you next time.
Aho, family.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks for tuning in to Microdose the Mind. If you enjoyed today's episode, share it with a friend and help us spread the word about the magic of microdosing. Be sure to follow us on social media for all the latest updates and insights. And remember, while we love our tiny doses, sometimes you just need to go big. Just make sure you're in the right set and setting. Until next time, keep your mind open and ready for growth.